Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of As the World Churns with me, your co-host Danielle Moody, along with my fabulous co-pilot in the apocalypse, Andy Levy. So today, oddly enough, we have good news to start out with, which we never get to start out anything with, which is by now you have heard about the mayoral primary win in New York City by Zoran Mamdani, the 33-year-old child of immigrants who was born in Uganda, who is part of the Democratic Socialist Party. And I was super excited, Andy, to vote for him in our ranked choice voting system here, where I'm certain many New Yorkers, decided not to rank Andrew Cuomo at fucking all, because I think, oh, I don't really want to be a part of a party that says, well, they have sexual predators. Can't we have them too? And wanted to put, how much did they put behind Andrew Cuomo? $25 million for this race. But as it turns out, the people had more power. But right now, we have 4 months until the general election. And my God, the 9/11 Islamophobia is on fucking 200 at this point. And I know that it's going to get a lot worse. What say you, Andy?
It is, look, it is, and I know I shouldn't be at this point, but it still is unbelievable to me that just the overt and blatant racism that has been just sort of emboldened in the Republican Party. You know, we always say on this show, there's no more quiet part. They just say everything out loud. And for a lot of years, for decades at least, there were people on the right. There were a lot of code words that were used to cover up for racism. Things like law and order, which was
Yeah, that's a
obviously
good one.
well, that was code for, scary Black people. And there were tons of those. They don't really exist anymore because they just come right out and say that Zoran Mamdani, who is Muslim, should be deported, is a jihadi terrorist. We have people talking about how, this is 9/11 all over again. Donald Trump Jr., I believe, retweeted something that read, "I'm old enough to remember when New Yorkers endured
yes.
9/11 instead of voting for it." Just an unbelievable amount of just pure, unadulterated Islamophobia, which is, let's be honest, is basically racism, particularly since, I mean, as you noted, Mamdani was born in Uganda, lived, I think, briefly in South Africa, maybe, and then came to New York as like a 7-year-old, and they are equating him with 9/11, which is stupid enough, obviously. But the fact is, like, the people who did 9/11 lived in Saudi Arabia, the good friends of the Trumps.
That and Mamdani was, what did we say? If you're doing the math, he was 10.
10? Yeah. Yeah. But he's not even from that region of the world. But obviously,
Correct.
none of this has anything to do with logic or reason. It's just, again, it's just straight out overt racism that they all know they don't suffer any consequences for, and they don't have to, wrap it up in code words and code terms. They can just come out and say it. He's a Muslim, therefore he's a jihadi, and therefore he hates Jews, and therefore, et cetera, down the line. And it's just, it is absolutely wild. And like I said at the top, Danielle, I know I shouldn't be surprised by this anymore because we've been seeing it for years. But man, this week I was reading this stuff, and everyone was worse than the last. And my jaw just kept dropping. The 9/11 imagery and the shit like that. And I was like, as cynical as I am, even I was like, man, this is really something.
But here's the thing for me, too, is that while, sure, I expect this type of shit from Republicans, what was more disgusting to me, Andy, is the fact that Andrew Cuomo's campaign put money into running anti-Muslim ads, where they darkened his complexion and thickened his beard, where there was, literature going out in and around New York saying that Mamdani is anti-Semitic. Meanwhile, he was endorsed by his fellow mayoral candidate who is Jewish, Comptroller Brad Lander. And so for me, what I was heartened by, and I'll say this, is the fact that New York City did not fall for the fucking rope-a-dope, and I don't think that New York City is going to fall for the rope-a-dope. I think that when you look at the breakdown, and we'll learn more over the week as all of the votes are counted, but when you look at the demographic breakdown of who went for Mamdani, which was pretty much everybody. But when you look at the age breakdown, the education breakdown, the wealth breakdown, like he captivated across, right? Many different groups in many different areas, including, I think one of the graphs that I was seeing was just like even the folks on fucking Wall Street voted for him, right? Like that live in and around the financial district, which if you're not from New York, is like where the wealthy and conservative moneyed people live. And so the fact is that I think that I at least want to believe, because this had been going on throughout the primary when he was an unknown, right? And New Yorkers still said, yeah, nah, we're good. So I think that what people are seeing and what these folks are not recognizing, Republicans and establishment Democrats, is that everyone is hip to their tricks, their racist tricks, and their Islamophobia, and the trying to stir people away from voting for a person that represents policies that could change their lives and make them better, and aren't going to fall for it. That is my hope, but we will see.
Yeah, and look, obviously I share that hope, and I was pleasant. I mean, we were texting election night, and we were all just really, really happy that Mamdani won, and that, at the same time, really, really happy that Cuomo didn't win. I was surprised. I thought Cuomo was going to win. I thought all the stuff that you mentioned was going to work more than it did. And I think part of that stems from having elderly Jewish relatives who absolutely bit on all of it, and who it became impossible for me to convince that Mamdani is not in fact anti-Semitic. So yeah, I am heartened by the fact that it ultimately didn't work. It still worked more than I would have liked it to. But again, I'm just, even now I'm reading the stuff. Vicky Palladino, who's a councilwoman here in New York City, Staten Island, I believe. She described Mamdani as a, quote, known jihadi terrorist. Like, you're a New York City councilwoman, and granted, you suck, and you always have, and she's Carl Palladino's wife, and if you live in New York, you probably know who Carl Palladino is, also just a corrupt, hacky politician back in the day. But I'm with you. I think we'll be okay in November, but I'm still a little worried about it.
I mean, look, I was cynical in terms of his ability, not his ability, but I guess like how far the Cuomo name was going to carry. And because it is such a legacy name in this city and in this state, but color me pleasantly fucking surprised with like a bit of hope and joy this week that like I never get to have here. So, yay.
Yay. Back to the bad news, Danielle.
Great.
And I don't think I didn't notice that you got to lead off with the good news, and you're like, Andy can handle the bad news.
I think he can. You're tough.
Yeah, I know, but let him piss off the listeners with the bad news. I'm going to sit here and celebrate. It's how you do. I understand. So on Thursday, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that states can block Planned Parenthood from receiving Medicaid money. The reason this is a big deal is not just because of abortion, but because Planned Parenthood, despite the way the right tries to paint it, provides a lot of health services to women that don't include abortion. Things like cancer screenings, things like contraception. And so they were able to get Medicaid money for those health services. Legally, you cannot get Medicaid money for abortion services, which is a whole other topic, but they were at least able to receive Medicaid money for non-abortion services. And the state of South Carolina didn't want them to receive any of this Medicaid money at all and tried to block them. And they got sued over it. And it worked its way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court has now said, no, if states don't want Planned Parenthood getting any money from Medicaid for any reason, they can do it. And we are continuing to see the erosion of healthcare in this country, particularly healthcare for the less well-off who, would be more likely to use a place like Planned Parenthood to get contraceptive service, to get cancer screenings, to get all these things that, again, have absolutely nothing to do with abortion. But here again, here is the Supreme Court, the conservative majority, just continuing to strip away the rights and abilities of folks who aren't rich. It seemingly is never going to stop, Danielle.
I thought to myself, is this Supreme Court worse than, let's say, the Supreme Court that decided on Dred Scott, or the Supreme Court that decided on Plessy v. Ferguson, or I kept going through some of these like enormous decisions that have been made. And I honestly think that this Supreme Court will go down, if we have books and this country doesn't just fully implode, as probably the worst in history. And that's saying a fucking lot, given the two pieces of law that I just named. I think that this Supreme Court will be known for killing, potentially millions of people, having blood on their hands. It is a disgusting display, of lawlessness, right? Like removing the ability of Planned Parenthood to take care of women, right, who are poor, who need aid. And there are already limited amounts of Planned Parenthoods in red states, right, as it is. We've talked about it on this show, the number of hospitals that have closed down in rural areas, right? Obstetrics units that can no longer take care of patients. So this blow by the Supreme Court, honestly, is nothing new. It's very on trend with what they've been doing. But my God, I do think that the Roberts Court will go down as the worst court in American history. And maybe that's what he's going for. So bravo.
Yeah, I mean, look, I would say that at this point, I believe that this current Supreme Court and this conservative majority would have ruled exactly how the Supreme Court ruled in Dred Scott, which was that Black people were not entitled to U.S. citizenship, and also would have ruled the same way in Plessy v. Ferguson, which was the infamous ruling that separate but equal was okay.
Mm-hmm.
And basically said that, the Jim Crow laws were fine and dandy. I don't see 5 votes the other way on either of those cases in this current court. So I'm with you. I mean, it's definitely, it's going to be probably top 3 and may end up number 1, as you said, in terms of the worst courts. And look, back to the Planned Parenthood thing, this is going to result in Planned Parenthood offices closing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they want.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the people who brought these suits want. I'm not even saying that they're against cancer screenings for women. They just don't give a shit enough about those when their goal is to shut down Planned Parenthood because Planned Parenthood provides abortion services. So they don't care about any of the collateral damage that would come along with shutting down these clinics, these offices, because they are so warped that literally all they can think of is we want to make it as hard as possible, if not impossible, for a woman to choose to have an abortion. So if that means that women get cancer because they couldn't afford an early screening or couldn't, there was no place near them doing an early screening, to them that really is, it's collateral damage. And they just, they just look at it as part of it's part of the fog of war. It's exactly what it is in war. It's when you do things that you don't mean to do and innocent people get hurt, who aren't the targets, and you're supposed to try to minimize that as much as possible. They don't care about minimizing it. They just don't care about it at all. And it's just to see this court time and time again side with them and say, no, that's okay with us. And, it's amazing. They'll say things like, well, this, we're overruling the lower courts because we don't believe this is a proper decision for the courts. We see this all the time, right,
Yep.
Danielle?
Yep.
And yet, when they want to step in to let Donald Trump do whatever the fuck he wants,
yep,
they have no problem stepping in then. So it's more of this, it's this phony originalist bullshit where they find, they pretend to find things that back up their views in by looking back at the framers of the Constitution, etc. But they pick and choose, and it's a scam, and it's such an obvious scam at this point that they are just picking and choosing, and it's the same thing they're doing here, and it's grotesque.
And I'm just like, you know what? Since they don't give a fuck about the rule of law, I don't think anybody else should either. I think that the rulings from the Supreme Court should be taken now with a grain of salt, which is what we are seeing happening in some lower courts pushing back against the Supreme Court and saying, no, my ruling still stands. And that is with one of the rulings that just happened this week with regard to deportations. And so the Supreme Court in many ways are making themselves wholly illegitimate, right?
Yeah.
And that's what happens in fascist regimes, right? Like you just keep going along. So it's just like, you know what? We actually don't give a fuck. How about that? And my other thing, too, is that none of these people should allow to feel comfortable in their lives. I don't want Justice John Roberts. I don't want Kavanaugh, any of these people being able to peacefully enjoy a meal. People should be protesting them every single fucking way that they go. They should be protested everywhere that they go, because the decisions that they're making are fucking disgusting, they are odious, and they are grotesque.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing I'll say is, you noted that some of the lower courts are like taking note of this and saying no. It is kind of interesting that the lower courts have been fairly consistent in ruling against Trump and things like that. And we're not talking lower courts that are completely filled with liberal justices or justices that were appointed by Democratic presidents. We're talking about courts that have judges, rather, who were appointed sometimes by Obama or whatever, but often by Bush, sometimes even by Trump, ruling against him. But it seems like as soon as it gets to the Supreme Court, they cannot wait to overturn these lower court decisions. And it's just showing that this isn't even really that much. Well, it's partially about ideology. It's not wholly about ideology, because you have ideologically conservative judges on the Court of Appeals, in the district courts, who are consistently ruling against Trump, as I said. And yet when it gets to the Thomases and the Roberts and the Kavanaughs and the Gorsuches and the Alitos, somehow they managed to find a way to help out Donald Trump, to help out conservatives in general. And so you're right. It's getting harder and harder every day to think of them as legitimate.
Because they're not. Folks, I am very happy to welcome to As the World Churns. If you all have listened to me when I was doing Woke AF on a regular basis, then you are not new to Chris Melody Fields Figueredo, who is the executive director of the Ballot Initiative Strategy Center, or BISC, had made multiple appearances on Woke AF to kind of talk to us about your organization. But I'm happy to bring you to As the World Churns. So I just want to give you an opportunity to just tell people what BISC is and what it is that you're focused on and do before we dig into the kind of environment we're in.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Danielle. And I love the name of the new podcast. As someone whose mother learned English by watching soap operas, we were a Days of Our Lives households. But As the World Turns was on sometimes. I appreciate it, and it made me chuckle. So, just for folks who may not remember or need grounding, the Ballot Initiative Strategy Center is really an organization that helps amazing human beings in the states at the national level really take their dreams about what they want to do for their communities and help them put that on the ballot. So that means we're helping people do research. We're literally this week. Our team is in Arkansas, training folks in the Mid-South, and part of the Midwest too. We're helping, getting on the phone, talking to folks like, hey, I want to put a ballot initiative. I want to gather signatures. I need to build a coalition. Like we are sort of your second teams. You're right. Like we're gonna help you get those issues on the ballot, and we're also tracking everything. We're seeing what's happening in certain states, trying to understand that, trying to find these trends to see what that might mean for the future and how we might respond in this moment, but always rooted and grounded and building long-term people-centered power. So it's a little bit about BISC and what we do.
I love it, and I appreciate the work that you do. And I also think that, when folks sometimes hear ballot initiative, they think that it's solely negative, right? They think about the ballot initiatives that are put up in order to restrict our rights or take away rights. But there are ballot initiatives that go out that we need passed, right? That are about expanding healthcare in states, that are about expanding rights for trans folks, that are important when you're going into various election seasons. I want to talk to you. I want to start off with just what we are seeing in with the courts. And just, I joked earlier on this show, I think that the Roberts courts may be labeled as the worst court in history. And that goes, and I'm still thinking about—
And that's a lot. I mean,
right?
There's some bad ones.
Because I'm like, because there are some really fucking bad ones, like, the court that did the Dred Scott decision, Plessy versus Ferguson. Like there are some really bad decisions that have come out of the Supreme Court in the history of this country. But the overturning of Roe v. Wade, the allowing of Donald Trump to deport protected status people to foreign gulags to be tortured and die, the taking away Planned Parenthood's funding, the initiatives that are floating up to try and roll back marriage equality, of overturning of affirmative action. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. We know that democracy has always been run and won through the courts, through initiatives, right, that have been about trying to expand equity and justice. And so when you see every month, every few weeks, the courts in the headline chipping away at our civil liberties and rights, like, what are you making of where we are right now?
So I see Octavia Butler in the back, and she's an Afrofuturist, is always, very grounded in the past, but also anticipating the future in her writing. What we try to do at BISC is notice trends and see what's happening at the state level, especially through the state legislatures, see what is happening at court cases, right? And begin to anticipate and ready ourselves for what might happen so we can hit the ground running when something potentially really terrible happens, right? The example I will give is the 2022 decision in Dobbs, right? Overturning Roe versus Wade, We were already seeing all these anti-abortion bills introduced at the state level. We were already seeing bad court cases happening. And so we were already, like, when we started to see those trends, we started to work and anticipate with our partners in the reproductive rights and freedom movement to, like, hey, this is going to come to the ballot at some point and we need to be ready. And so when Dobbs happened, I mean, if folks will remember, the Kansas abortion ban was weeks later. We had worked with that coalition. We had talked about messaging. We had done the organizing. So we were ready to meet that moment. And then that fall, we defeated every abortion ban and won every affirmative protection for abortion. Similarly, when we started to see all these anti-LGBTQ, all these anti-trans bills move through the courts, move through the state legislatures, right? We reached out to our friends in the LGBTQ movement and said, this is going to come to the ballot. So let's start preparing now so that we are ready for the moment. And that's sort of like how we've been trying to sort of make sense of this, of like not waiting for a court decision to happen, but how are we readying and sort of tilling the soil and fertilizing the grounds and building the muscle with our partners so then we can take action, and the court may make a decision, but the people are in a very different place. And that is what we have seen with reproductive freedom, right? We've won the majority of them. And the ones that we lost was because of authoritarian state governments, right? You know, intervening and really putting major obstacles, misinformation, disinformation, right, to stop those ballot measures from being successful. But in some places like Florida, the majority of the people still won, right? 57% in any other state would be a win. But because of the law in their state, they had to have a supermajority. So that's sort of, it is so hard. And we feel it in our bones, especially as queer people, especially as women of color. Like, I'm an immigrant. The text I got the morning after the election from my mom is, do I have to start walking around, who's a naturalized citizen now, as am I, do I have to start walking around with my passport to prove that I'm a U.S. citizen? So that fear is so real when you see all these things. But how do we address and feel the things that we need to feel, but also how are we rising to the occasion in the moment? So when those things happen, we have a plan to show people there's a actually different way and answer and world that people want when our government and our courts fail us.
I'm a child of immigrants, my family, but my mother is a naturalized citizen as well. And, you know, I think about right now, as you were speaking about these masked terrorists that have been given carte blanche to invade our communities and harass and brutalize and kidnap members of our community. And I was thinking as you were speaking, I said, you know, one of the things that I would like to see, and you tell me if this is something that you have seen, is I would like to see local jurisdictions, city councils, state houses, state senates pass legislation that says that you cannot come into our community masked and without your badge being readily available, right? With ghost plates on your cars. Are these things that actually can work themselves up to initiatives that people can begin to lobby their members on? Because at the very least, we need to know whether or not the person that is beating up an esthetician at a nail shop or a worker at a factory is a Proud Boy or they're actual law enforcement. And right now, we don't know.
We don't know. No, I mean, it's such a fair question. And, you know, I think there are local jurisdictions, mayors, city council people. I mean, I think about what we have seen in places like LA and New Jersey where, you know, elected officials have, you know, gone to ICE detention centers or, you know, have been out, you know, I think of Senator Padilla in California, who are also making their way through what we are all experiencing right now. And I think in some ways we're anticipating things to be bad right? But to the level, I think a lot of people didn't know, right? And so I think those little actions, like, what we have seen by elected officials, give me hope of really asking these hard questions, because this is where authoritarianism wins, right? When people are mass, you can't see them, right? They're disappearing people. It is harder to fight an enemy that is unknown, right?
Right.
And so I do really, thinking of friends who are state legislators, who are actually thinking about running for office, right? That is that call to action that they have, that they really want to call people out on, like, this is not right. This is wrong. This is not the way things should be. And I think also let's recognize our history. Also, this has happened before, right? If you think about the civil rights movement, if you think about the segregated South and the lynching and the mobs, right? Like, this has been part of our history. And again, to go to Octavia Butler, who's here, there, and
yep, I
for
love it.
me, we have to understand our past to know our future, and how to respond in the present. So that gives me hope. And I think, community leaders especially are thinking of creative ways of how to respond, whether it's through the initiative process, whether it's talking to their, local election officials, or their city council members, or their school boards, or what. People are trying to figure out how to respond in this moment. I think, that's what is kind of exciting about what happened this week in New York City, of the election of Zoran, in, like, somebody who was truly a really grassroots campaign, really listening, really going into community, saying, these are some of the things that I want to do, but also I want to hear from you. Like, those are the things that are exciting and inspiring, and how we get out of what's going on.
Because I think that, Zoran Mamdani winning the the Democratic primary for mayor, with having $25 million that was thrown into Andrew Cuomo's pot, the most money that was ever spent on a mayoral race, and the billionaire class being pissed, right? And you're seeing how they are in cahoots with corporate media, who are saying, isn't this strange? Isn't this weird? Oh, look at this socialist and what have you. To me, this is encouraging. It is encouraging to believe that the people still collectively can have more power than the billionaires, who believe that they can buy politicians, that they can buy elections. And so how do you utilize these glimmers that we are getting these days, these glimmers of hope, to really fortify you and your organization, and how you all are moving forward at a time when we are fighting to see glimmers?
It is those glimmers that are absolutely essential right now. It is what happened Tuesday, which feels like already so far away.
Correct.
In New York City, it is all the folks in Los Angeles who were standing up to ICE and saying, not in my community, right? Those are the glimmers we have to hold on to. I just wrote a thought piece, it's also thinking about the action that Harvard and other universities took recently to give free tuition to students whose families make less than $200,000. That is generational impact right there, and that gives me glimmers and hope. I think about my neighborhood craft shop, who, in response to federal workers getting laid off, offered free headshots to folks. Like, these are the ways that people are already coming together in action. People and institutions, with the Harvard and university example, that is what's absolutely necessary. Those are the things that need to be tested and experimented all over the place. And then we learn from that, we galvanize from that, and we do it in other places, because their intent is to barrage us with so much that we feel hopeless, that we think we can't come together and we can't fight back. Literally, ballot measures are showing us that people want a different answer, that they actually want answers to the challenges they're facing, the communities. And so they've organized, they've gotten signatures, they've come together to raise the minimum wage, to protect public education, to protect marriage equality, to secure reproductive rights. They have done that. The people have done that, right?
Yeah.
And so it is those actions, big or small, that create a reverberating effect. Think about those No Kings rallies. Most of the cities that had them, they had higher turnout than expected, right? I think about my parents in Palm Harbor, Florida, where it is Trumplandia, right? But they had a No Kings action in their in that town, and my mom was like, "Whoa, what are all these people?" And for her, it was really important for her to see white people out there in the streets.
Yes.
Really important for her to see that. So we have, yes, it feels, the weight of everything feels so heavy, but we have to hold on to those glimmers. We have to find those little glimmers. You know, we have to take those little leaps and those big leaps in order for us to move beyond this and stop what is happening, because we do have a very small window to stop authoritarianism at the federal level in the United States. So I have to hold on to those. We all have to hold on to them.
Last question for you. I am both a optimist. I have to be, because otherwise I wouldn't do this job, but also like a realist.
That's right.
How confident are you? And I'm asking you to shake a magic ball and look into it, that we have midterm elections.
I mean, that's a big question. I think there is a huge question whether we will have free or fair elections. And I think that's important for us to have on our minds right now. And if we are concerned, which I have concerns, then we have to start taking intervention points now. We don't wait to see if that might happen. And we can't move from a place of fear, but we have to start shift to that, like what I said, like tilling the soil and fertilizing the ground. We have to start to create the conditions and get people aware of that, even that possibility. So if it happens, people rise up and firmly push back. So I think there is reason to be concerned with what we're seeing with the federal government, with what we're seeing in court cases. You know, you have to look at all that in this crystal ball, right? But you don't wait to see that anticipated future, right? You start to create the conditions to counter that now. And I think that's really important for people to understand I've been thinking a lot about 7 generations worth, and the decisions we make today are going to affect 7 generations from now. And all those little choices we're making right now, not 1, not 2, right? Many of them are going to create the conditions for the future. And I think that's my advice to anybody right now is, don't wait for things to get worse. They're already pretty bad.
Yep.
And start taking those big or small actions to start to shift things.
Chris, please tell people how they can find out more about BISC and get involved with your incredible organization.
Well, we make it pretty easy on all the socials at Ballot Strategy, and then our website, which has so much information if you want to nerd out, ballot.org.
Chris, I thank you so very much for making the time for As the World Churns, and we will continue to check in with you throughout the year to see what initiatives we need to be paying attention to, we need to get people woke to. I really, really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. A pleasure as always.
The days of taking labor's vote for granted are over. It's time for labor to think about a bigger vision that lifts up and includes all working class people. This statement was issued Tuesday night after Zoran Mamdani won the Democratic mayoral primary here in New York City by UAW Region 9A leader Brandon Mancilla. He joins me now to talk about why this region's UAW endorsed Mamdani and what a Mamdani victory in November might mean. Brandon, thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So before we get into Tuesday's huge win, tell us a little bit about the UAW and what Region 9A means. A lot of people think your union only represents auto workers, probably because UAW stands for United Auto Workers, but that's not true, is it?
Yeah, like most unions in the country, the UAW represents a whole array of sectors and industries and types of workers. The UAW at this point is 1 million members strong, 400,000 actively working members, 600,000 retirees. About 150,000 of those members do work for the big 3, auto companies in the United States, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis. But we represent a lot more workers. And in Region 9A, while we do have auto workers in the region, in New York City, We represent workers in higher education, in cultural institutions and museums, at movie theaters, legal services, nonprofits, and some auto dealerships and other small manufacturing. And even places like the Strand bookstore, if you know the historic New York
Oh,
City
wow. Yeah,
bookstore.
sure.
The staff at the Strand are UAW members. They were on strike last December, actually, won a
Sure.
great contract. So
Yeah, I remember that. I didn't realize that was y'all that helped them do that.
yeah, that's UAW Region NA right there. Yep.
That's great. And what's your background? Because much like Mamdani, you're a pretty young dude, and I mean that as a jealousy tinged compliment.
Yeah. So I was born in Jamaica, Queens. My parents are from Guatemala. They were undocumented immigrants, and they got citizenship in the 1980s. And I was born in Jamaica, Queens. I went to college in Massachusetts, then I went to grad school at Harvard. And when I got to Harvard, there was a UAW organizing drive happening, starting in around 2015. And I joined that organizing drive. We won our union in 2018. I became the local president in 2020. I became an organizer with the UAW. And then, a lot like Zoran, I ran on a challenge insurgent slate alongside Sean Fain to take over the UAW, reform the UAW for the better. And since then, we've been working hard to win record contracts, strike where necessary, and organize workers into the UAW and revitalize the labor movement.
That's fantastic. So back in February, Region 9A endorsed sort of a slate of mayoral candidates here in New York City: Mamdani, Brad Lander, and Jessica Ramos. And I believe you put Mamdani first for ranked choice voting. And I should also note that you rescinded your endorsement of Ramos earlier this month after she threw in her lot with Cuomo. But the point is, a whole bunch of labor unions endorsed Andrew Cuomo in this race, and only a handful backed Mamdani. What made you all decide to do this? What did you see in Mamdani, and what did you not see in Cuomo?
Right. So our union does things a little differently than a lot of the labor movement. In our region, we have political councils that are very local union led and led by the membership, which means that back in October, even before the November general election, where Donald Trump, retook the White House, we knew that the New York City mayoral election was going to be the real first test, whoever won that election, as to what the future of the Democratic Party would be. How the city would relate to whoever was in office. And we knew that there was going to be a great opportunity there. And Zoran came to us really early on when he was thinking about running for mayor and told us what he thought his path to victory was. He was serious about running a winning campaign, not just having a protest campaign or, a fun alternative campaign. He really wanted to win. He had a serious plan to win, focused on the cost of living. We also had, a great relationship with the comptroller's office, with Brad Lander. And ever since he was in city council, so both Zoran and Brad were UAW champions. And at the time, Jessica Ramos was also, we had a strong relationship with her in the state Senate. In October, we had a lot of strategy meetings with our members in New York City. We then did in late November forums with many candidates, including folks who we didn't ultimately endorse right away, like Zelen or Myri. And then in December, we announced our unranked slate at the time. And we ultimately endorsed Zoran number one. We ranked him number one. We're the only major union in the city to have ultimately ranked Zoran number one. We're the largest union to have done so in the city. DC 37 ultimately, which represents the most city workers in New York, ranked him number two. We did this so in May. But when we first had our slate, we were very clear that this was a strategy to defeat, at the time, Eric Adams. So, when DREAM came about, the DREAM movement, DREAM, don't rank Eric Adams for mayor, we started that. We started that movement because we knew that we needed a mayoral candidate that took down Eric Adams. And then the rumors started about Andrew Cuomo jumping in the race. So it became don't rank Eric or Andrew for mayor. But that was our strategy. It was based on knowing that we were done with the politics of the past and the corrupt mayor of the present, and that Andrew Cuomo was simply going to run on a second term of Eric Adams, even though he was trying to rebrand himself as the non-corrupt version of Eric Adams, even though that's hilarious given his own record. So that we knew that's what we were up against. With Andrew Cuomo specifically, this wasn't just because our members, wanted some other politician or more progressive or anything like that. The reason why we rejected Andrew Cuomo is because we specifically as UAW have had a relationship with Andrew Cuomo that has not been very good since he was governor. In 2019, up in Western New York and Central New York, so upstate, not in the city, that area has GM plants, General Motors auto plants. And those workers went out on strike in 2019. GM was struck by the UAW all over the country. Andrew Cuomo never showed up to the picket line. He did not receive calls from the UAW when we asked for his support. And more importantly, he did not sign a bill that would have given unemployment insurance benefits to striking workers. We wanted to reduce that to 1 week, and he refused to sign that, which meant that our UAW members in auto up in upstate New York would not have had the support of their own state, even though it's a pro-labor state, when they were on strike. So when he rejected that legislation and refused to come to even show up to our picket line for a photo op, that was the end of the relationship between UAW and Andrew Cuomo. So it was rooted in our experience. It was rooted in what kind of city we wanted to build, the kind of politics we want to build. And frankly, we were done with politicians that, said one thing to you, championed themselves at AFL-CIO meetings, and then the first chance they got, stabbed you in the back. So the reason we have someone like Donald Trump in office right now, someone who's anti-union like Donald Trump, is because of Democrats like Andrew Cuomo, and we wanted to do things differently.
So why do you think so many unions did back Cuomo?
I think you're going to have to ask them. I think I am delighted to see that some labor leaders and unions that did not endorse Zoran have begun to, speak out in support of Zoran after the fact, after a Tuesday, and that's great. And we think Zoran is the kind of candidate that and will be the kind of mayor that wants to work with labor. Zoran did outreach to all the unions. He met with the central labor councils and interviewed a lot of unions. Many unions after we endorsed ended up ranking him, if not outright endorsing him, especially at the local union level. But it was disappointing at the time to see so many unions decide to, either sit out or wait for Andrew Cuomo to jump into the race. But yeah, the reasons why, I think it's we like I said, we want to do things a little differently. We want to be able to put forward an offensive pro-worker, pro-labor agenda. We want to lead. We want to set the terms of the debate, not wait for the Democrats to set those terms and then we fit into it. And unfortunately, I think over the last few decades, especially as union density has gone down, instead of unions taking the lead and organizing, they've oftentimes tried to defend what they have. And I understand where that comes from.
Sure.
The employers have the law behind them. They have the money. They have the backing of the White House. They have the backing of their state legislatures to just go after labor and diminish our power. But the thing is, when you are so defensive, you actually end up losing because you can't hold down the fort for that long, right? So the UAW, over the last 5 to 10 years, and especially since I took office, we've organized the most units of any other union in New York City. So we have not been sitting back. We've been actively organizing. And when you organize workers who have not had a union into the union for the first time, you find that workers you're hearing their struggles, right? It's not just union politics, like any other day. You're dealing with workers who are facing issues at their workplace that they've never had a way to fight back before. And so they're telling you what their cost of living crisis is. They're telling you what it's like to live without certain rights that union workers have taken for granted after so many years with a contract.
Right.
And so that makes you approach politics a little differently because you're making outreach to politicians to support you on the picket line, to support you when you're on strike, to support you when you have ambitious contract demands. And that means you're pulling politicians in a place in which they have to actually prove that they're pro-union and pro-worker instead of just fitting into whatever their legislative priorities are when they're governing. So we took that energy through our endorsement process, and we said, we believe that if Zoran Mamdani gets in front of people, if the campaign takes off, and if we are a part of that campaign and talk to our neighbors, talk to our coworkers, talk to strangers, he will take off because his message is rooted in the economic realities that working people are facing. And we're all struggling to pay the rent right now. We would all like to see universal childcare in this city. And he was the only candidate that was bringing up those issues in a viable way.
So we keep seeing stories now about how, businesses are going to flee New York City if Mamdani wins in November. First of all, do you believe this will happen?
No, businesses are not going to flee New York City. And let's be real. Like he's talking about 1%, 2% tax increase on the wealthiest New Yorkers. It's ridiculous to think that this is some kind of radical socialist agenda that's going to take over industries and whatnot. So it's an agenda I think that would be popular in any city, in any state in this country. And the fact that, billionaires, poured so much money, DoorDash, Michael Bloomberg, Ackman into Cuomo's super PAC shows you that they feel threatened by this. And then when you peel all the propaganda off, they're threatened by something that's really simple, which is, and honestly beneficial to everyone, which is, working people, middle-class people in this city should have, effective, free, and fast transportation to get to work, to get around the city. They need universal childcare so that they can build a career, have a life, be able to take care of their kids, stay in the city instead of leaving with their tax dollars to other parts of the state or to Jersey or to Connecticut, where they could think they can get ahead more than in New York. And you just go on and on and on, right? Freezing the rent. I mean, are we supposed to take another $300, $500, $1,000 increase to our rent and just take it? Like, come on, like this is ridiculous. So, I think the platform makes a lot of sense, clearly, to the vast majority of Democratic voters, and I think it's going to make the most sense to New Yorkers, period, in the general.
Have you ever seen so many people terrified by the idea of free bus rides?
I briefly, lived in Boston when Mayor Wu was starting her pilot program on buses, and I'm telling you right now, riots weren't started on the streets over free buses. So
you all survived. It wasn't like
Yeah.
it wasn't a 28 days later situation.
We were fine. It's a good movie, 28 Days Later, but that's how it's going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned Bill Ackman. On Wednesday, the New York Post reported that he will endorse our current corrupt mayor, Eric Adams, who is running as an independent. What do you make of all this?
It's expected. I do not expect the billionaire class and a lot of the political establishment to rush behind Zoran. One thing that I find more interesting than the, whatever billionaires are deciding to do right now is how many people are getting the wrong message behind what allowed Zoran to actually win this primary. They're making a lot about his personality, his charisma, which is undeniable. He is an incredible generational talent, but that is not the reason alone that he was able to win. I know him firsthand because he's my assembly member in Astoria. And like I said, since I've been in office, we've worked very closely with him in Albany to try to get some of our priorities passed. And I knew he had a shot right the minute we talked about this because I know how principled and how effective he is as a leader. But the reality is he did two things. He had a platform that was rooted in the economic realities that working class people faced in the city. And second, he inspired a mass volunteer base. He reintroduced mass politics into the city after a long time, and that cannot be denied. To have 50,000 volunteers knocking on doors, making phone calls, sending texts, talking to their neighbors, going to their families, going to church, going everywhere to try to make sure that your best friends, your family, your neighbors, strangers voted. That is something that you cannot buy, you cannot replace with something else, and definitely you cannot have just simply by putting out cool videos. His comms team was incredible, right? But it was what was the message behind that, and what was the vision behind those videos? That's what was more important. You can have a high production budget, and Steven Spielberg can direct your videos, but if that doesn't mean anything, you're not going to move people to vote. And I saw that with our members. The minute our swag dropped, our UAW for Zoran shirts, we had a rush of people, our own members, coming to the office to pick those up. There wasn't a subway stop I couldn't go in the city that I didn't see my own members wearing the shirt. There wasn't a canvas shift that there weren't UAW for Zoran shirts at. And I think that energy was contagious and it engaged people. And it's because people were able to see what democracy looked like in action, which is not just, let me vote for this guy who may or may not do something for us. It was actually, we can participate in something and change our city for the better.
All of that seems so terrifying to a lot of the Democratic establishment, doesn't it?
Of course, because they rather us, wait around until they come up with their priorities and then, maybe they give us a couple crumbs. But, crumbs right now when people are going hungry, can't pay the rent, can't afford to live in the city they want to live in, that's just not a...
Yeah, no, for sure. What do you see as Mamdani's biggest obstacles over the next 4.5 months? Obviously, we know Eric Adams is running on an independent line. Cuomo hasn't said for sure whether he's going to do that. And look, we saw all throughout this mayoral campaign, we saw this absolutely horrific sort of negative advertising trying to paint Mamdani as anti-Semitic, trying to paint him as a communist. How do you think he battles against this over the next 4.5 months?
By doing what he's doing. I think I think people are wrong if they just assume that this was a phenomenon of a Democratic primary. He absolutely mobilized the Democratic base, but he also engaged new voters, first-time voters. For example, my brother is not someone who often votes in primaries, and he voted. He made sure to go vote. That kind of voter is someone that he was able to energize, and I think that's going to happen in the general. I think he's not going to stop just because the primary is over. He's not going to assume he has a cakewalk into the mayor's office. This campaign is going to continue. We're already talking about what the next stages are going to look like, because we know that the billionaires, the political establishment is going to throw everything they can to at least damage him. If they can't stop him, try to damage him before he takes office. So I'm confident he can win. Obviously, throwing your lot behind Eric Adams, someone also with scandals over the last 3 years is not, again, this is the party put itself in this position. When you decide to say that Eric Adams is going to be the national symbol of the Democratic Party going forward in 2021, and then this is what happens, and you set yourself up. If you're going to go behind Andrew Cuomo with all of his baggage and all of his history and try to make him the guy, you've also set yourself up for failure. So, that doesn't mean that Zoran was this kind of like people settled for him, and people were excited by him. They saw him as an alternative. So I think that's going to continue.
Yeah, for sure. But also, it's nice to vote for someone who doesn't belong in prison.
Sure. So I know that firsthand. I mean, our last two two of our former UAW presidents were put in prison on corruption charges, right? So I think that's what we relate to this campaign on that level too. We know what it's like to try to reform an institution that has completely lost its principles and its direction. And, that's why we're proud to have ranked Zoran number one.
Yeah, absolutely. Brandon, thank you so much. And if it's not obvious, I am hardly impartial here. I rank Zoran number one, and I'm thrilled he won. And I hope this is the last we ever hear of Andrew Cuomo. And so thank you and your members for helping to fight this fight, because I think it's really, really important, not just for New York City, but as you said, for this country and for the Democratic Party nationally going forward. So thank you so much, Brandon.
Absolutely. Thanks for your time.
So, Andy, another banner week in America. We had a little bit of good news, but still just a fire hose of bad. Who is your fuck that guy to close out this week?
My fuck that guy is going to be someone who I feel like was in the news a lot and was kind of like had become like a national figure for a while, and then he sort of just faded away. Representative Dan Crenshaw, you may remember him as the guy with the eye patch, and Saturday Night Live made fun of him and people got upset, and then they had to invite him on. But he had kind of been quiet, like I said, and now he's very upset because the Senate parliamentarian has ruled that several provisions of the big, beautiful bullshit bill do not meet the Senate rules, because they're trying to do a thing called fast tracking the bill. And in order to do that, the bill has to meet a bunch of provisions. And the Senate parliamentarian has basically said, no, you can't fast track this bill if you're going to leave these provisions in. Some of these provisions involve how the state can tax Medicaid providers. And there's a whole bunch of others, but there's one in particular. There's a provision in the bill that would have banned Medicaid funding from being used to cover any gender-affirming care for people of any age. Crenshaw was the one that wanted this desperately in the bill, and the parliamentarian said, you can't have it in the bill if you want to fast track it. So again, the parliamentarian, it's got nothing to do with whether the guy likes these provisions or not. He's basically just there to rule on whether a bill can proceed in a certain way based on what's in it, how much money it's going to cost, stuff like that. So all he's saying is you can't have that provision in the bill if you want to fast track it. So instead of saying, all right, well, I guess we need to put that in another bill, or we need to not fast track this bill, Dan Crenshaw is doing what Republicans these days are doing. He is calling for Senate Majority Leader John Thune to fire the Senate parliamentarian. Like the childishness, like when they don't get their way. And everyone kind of saw this coming. People were like, there's a bunch of provisions in this bill that are never going to pass the parliamentarian for the bill to be fast-tracked. And so sure enough, she rules this way, and they act like, again, because they're always the victims, so they act like the aggrieved party, and that they're being being treated very unfairly, as Trump likes to say. And so they sit here and, much as earlier we talked about how they want Mamdani deported, or, whatever, they just cannot deal with the fact that the world doesn't always line up with what they want. And so here we have Dan Crenshaw calling for the parliamentarian to be fired. Obviously, she should not be fired, but who the hell knows in this day and age. But for that reason, he gets my fuck that guy seal of disapproval for this week.
I wish that they would just grow a pair.
I
Do you know
know.
what I'm saying? For
Yeah.
like, and when I say a pair, I mean like a pair of ovaries, like something that's tough. Do you know what I'm
Sure.
saying? Like,
Sure.
actually get your shit together and stop fucking complaining like whiny little fucking boys, and just like manage your shit. And also to his constituents, stop sending people to Congress that actually don't know how the fuck Congress works.
Yeah.
Fuck
would
that
be
guy.
nice. All right, Danielle, close out our week. Who you got?
So, Representative Al Green brought orders of impeachment against Donald Trump for the illegal bombing of Iran. And 130 Democrats did what Democrats love to do, which is vote against their own people and show absolutely no allegiance and complete and total hypocrisy. When it comes to foreign affairs, what I realize is that there is very little daylight between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Like, you couldn't get a resolution probably on, stopping genocide. And, oh, we're all wondering now what happened to the 400,000 Palestinians that Netanyahu wiped off the planet. Or, deciding that maybe bombing Iran isn't the best idea without going through, Congress, who gets to declare war. But, there are actually just as many war hawks on the fucking left, and I use that in quotation marks, as there are on the right, with 130 Democrats saying no to impeachment. And then you have Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez also offering articles of impeachment on, the barrage of criminality outside of the illegal bombing of Iran, but all of the domestic criminality that Donald Trump is doing. And that didn't go through either. So when Democrats are looking around and they think to themselves, why is our polling at 29%, which is 9 percentage points less than Donald Trump? This is the fucking reason. You goddamn spineless, weak, sloth-like, deer in headlight, ridiculous, just complicit motherfuckers. This is why people don't want to vote for you, right? This is why millions of people sat home in 2024, because you are mealy-mouthed, middle of the road, just... There aren't enough words for me to use to seal this point. So I'll end it with this. Fuck all y'all. Fuck you guys.
What they want here is they don't want to do their job, because it's Congress's job, as according to the War Powers Resolution, to authorize declaring war on another nation. The idea is that Donald Trump violated this, as every president since going back at least to Reagan, I think probably before that, maybe even going back to Truman, has done this. But the point is, like, it's supposed to be their job. They in Congress, it's supposed to be their job to authorize this stuff. And they are sitting here saying, oh, we don't want that responsibility. It's so gross. And you're right. I mean, we saw a lot of this from the Democrats, and they were, some of them, the AOCs and Al Greens aside, who were very clear. Some of them are like, well, he should have asked us first. And basically, said that they would have given him the go-ahead. So it's not, they don't have a problem with what he did. They only have a problem with the fact that he didn't ask him yet. And clearly they don't even have a big problem with that, because if they did, they'd impeach him for it, or at least try to advance some sort of articles of impeachment. And instead, they do what they're best at, which is absolutely fucking nothing. So yeah, fuck all these guys. And I just, primary everyone.
Everyone.
Everyone.